Hi, everyone. I'm Jamie. My pronouns are she or hers. I'm the director of youth programs at Keshet. Wow, big spotlight. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about Keshet real quick. I comprise 1/3 of the amazing youth team here, myself, Ami, and Sawyer. So, woo! We're so glad to welcome you to this exciting, amazing panel that Sawyer, our fantastic youth programs intern, has put together. So, Keshet is the Organization for LGBTQ Equality in Jewish Life. And our approach to that takes essentially three different shapes. One is through community mobilizing. So we work on the grassroots level, local level, national levels to forward LGBTQ rights around the country. Another angle is through education and training. So we have professionals on our team who are dedicated to creating institutional change within Jewish communities and institutions also around the country. And so if you can think of a community that could maybe use some more growth in terms of being more LGBTQ affirming, they are the fabulous folks on whom you can lean. And then finally, my absolute favorite approach to this work is through our youth programs. So our youth programs are really all about empowering young LGBTQ Jewish folks to really just sort of seize ownership over these amazing community building spaces and just share their wonderful, authentic selves and leadership with the rest of the world, building a more just and liberatory future. So that's Keshet. If you'd like to be in touch, we'll put our emails in the chat and we'll put a link to our general website in the chat as well for you to check it out. Otherwise, I hand it over to my fabulous colleague, Sawyer Goldsmith.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jamie, um, for introducing Keshet. So first, we're going to have each of the panelists introduce themselves. They have around 2 minutes to just say whatever they want. And then in the meantime, I'm going to post a link in the chat where you can submit your questions. So I'm going to go ahead and spotlight all of the panelists. Add spotlight. Add spotlight. Add spotlight. And add spotlight. And oh, I'm missing. Am I missing? Where'd they go? Am I missing someone? No, I'm not. Sorry. Whoever wants to go first.
Hi, my name's Alex. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a rising junior at Barnard College and the Jewish Theological Seminary in the double degree program. I study comparative literature and Talmud. On campus, I'm technically still the Gabbai of the traditional egalitarian conservative style minyan. I also live in a Jewish food co-op. And I'm the religious coordinator there. And I also am on the editorial board of the Jewish Life magazine on campus, the Columbia Current. And when I'm not spending my time in the Jewish community on campus, I'm also on the board of Keshet. So nice coming together of those two things.
I can go. Hi, my name is Tova Ricardo. I use she, hers pronouns. I am a recent graduate of Columbia University in New York City. I'm from the San Francisco Bay Area in California. I am a Black, queer, Orthodox Jewish woman. I am currently working for an organization called Kamocha, which is an organization that centers Black, Orthodox Jewish people. And I was very involved in the Jewish community at Columbia Barnard. I was involved in a fellowship for Jewish and queer people that Jamie actually used to run. And so that was like a really great experience. And I did a lot of religious life work. And I also was one of the presidents and co-founders of our Jews of Color caucus.
Hi, I'm Julia. I just graduated studying history at a large Midwestern university. I'm from the East Coast. And while I was at college, I found Jewish community outside of like the formal one that my university had, and I'm excited to be here.
I'm Rebecca. I am also from the San Francisco Bay Area. I just graduated Scripps with a degree in philosophy. Kind of. It's complicated. But I was not very involved in Jewish life in high school. And then in college, I suddenly found myself at Hillel without really meaning to, and then ended up serving on the board for 3.5 years until the day I graduated. And in that role, I served both as a general board member and then also as the president for a year. So then I was also able to see, all the inner workings of Jewish life on campus.
And lastly, my name's Matt. I use he, him pronouns. I'm a student, rising junior at the University of Nevada, Reno. I am the vice president of my student Hillel board and also the president of our chapter of AEPI, the Jewish fraternity. As well as that, I'm also the Keshet representative for our Hillel student board. And I really feel like my interactions between Jewish and queer student life is really creating a queer space within the Jewish community.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. So right now we have no questions, which is okay. If you don't want to submit them on the Mentimeter, you can also just ask them. I think we're a small enough group. And if you don't have any questions, I have some in my back pocket. But I'd love to hear what the youths would like to know. All right, I will ask a question to kick us off, and maybe that will spark some inspiration. So, why is it important to you that your Jewish identity is accepted in queer spaces and your queer identity is accepted in Jewish spaces?
Well, for me, it's kind of like a twofold thing. Is the practical problem of I don't want to be in a space that I don't feel comfortable being myself. And then also like a very related philosophic reason, like more philosophic reason being that I believe it's important for me to wait, I'm trying to figure out the best way to explain my feeling about this. Like just on principle, I don't want to be in a community that doesn't accept me, not just in terms of my comfort, but in terms of I just think it's morally wrong. And I do not want to be in spaces that I have that strong of a moral disagreement with their structure.
I really like how Rebecca put that. I guess the way I think of it is I'm not half Jewish and half queer. Like you can't like cut me down the middle, you know? I am Jewish and queer at the same time all the time. And except, having queer solidarity in a queer space means accepting the Jewish part of me and vice versa.
So, what's interesting for me when I think about this question is I don't really have that much queer community around me that's not already Jewish. And part of that's an active choice. I don't particularly make an effort to engage with that community. And part of that is just, I have a queer community. It's my Jewish community. There's enough overlap there that it doesn't really make a difference to me. But also sometimes, and this is less a Jewish thing and more as a person who has who values faith and values Judaism, not just as a cultural, but as a religious identity and talks about that a lot. it's sometimes just hard to interact with the like regular community because they kind of look at me as if I've grown two heads whenever I talk about the fact that like I'm Jewish and I keep Shabbat, and they're like, why? Is a dynamic that exists. I'm much happier, I think, to find queer people among the Jews, because I think, you know, that's just an easier space for me to be, where I don't have to explain, oh yeah, I keep Shabbat, and this is what I do, or I study, you know, the Talmud all day long, not all day long yet. So yeah, that's one way to have it, I think. And I definitely know people who have it the inverse. Their queer communities are where they find their Jews. So.
I think for me, it's something where I feel like I wish that I do also associate a lot of the times with other queer Jews, but I know that in some of the circles that I associate with in the Jewish community, they're not always going to be like, they're not gonna like maybe hate me because I'm queer, but they're not, you know, they're not gonna be like the most excited about it. And so I have to kind of decide where I want to be. Is this space like, are they just gonna be tolerant with my queerness, and I can still exist as a Jewish person and not have my queerness be like a really big issue? Or is this space going to actually be harmful? And if it's going to be harmful, then I probably don't want to be in this space, because I'm not someone who necessarily, like, the first thing I say about myself is that I'm a queer person, but it is an important part of my identity. And if I feel that if I am unsafe, then I'll retreat. But I have to just kind of pick and choose, because there are some Jewish spaces that are very beautiful to me and that align with my observance and the way I practice my Judaism, but may not necessarily be talking about queerness, you know, all the time, or have that be something that is like necessarily important to most of the the people who are there.
Yeah, I like what I'm sorry, Tova ended on as reading your last name. Uh, about how like there are definitely like a lot of Jewish spaces that I've been in where like my queerness might not be something that I'll bring to the forefront, or that is something that's really present in the space. And like there's those spaces aren't like explicitly harmful, but like Rebecca and Matt were saying, like, I mean, those spaces aren't places where I can like be my full self, if that makes sense. And like my queerness influences my Judaism influences my queerness. So that's why it's really important to have a space where both can intersect and exist.
Thank you all so much. Our next question from someone in the audience is, what might the panelists say to someone who is hoping to be more out in college, including in Jewish spaces?
Do it.
So obviously your mileage will vary depending on the school you go to. And I'm speaking here from, I wasn't more out when I went to college because I was already pretty, like, couldn't really get more out than I already was. But I think part of being in a lot of school, this is not a unique thing to say I'm at a women's college, but you're going to be surrounded by a lot more queer people, I think, than in high school, just because more people will be out. It's easier to find people. You're at a larger institution, probably. There's going to be more queer people. And I think that having, and more Jews, probably, depending on where you went to high school. Went to a day school, maybe not. But you can find communities, and I think that finding those communities will help you be more out. And also, academically speaking, gender studies is a thing. And also, like, colleges love to be interdisciplinary. So you'll find classes, even if you're not like in gender studies, which is a very queer world, you'll find like, I'm in comparative literature, and if I wanted to, I could take a class about queer lit. That would be a very easy class for me to take. One of my favorite professors. So, you know, that is a thing that it really exists, and having those communities makes it a lot easier to be out. And also, like, I don't know, people care less in college.
Yeah, I definitely want to just like emphasize what Alex just said. in high school, it's people that you have to be around because you see them every day. You don't necessarily like each other very much, but you have to put up with each other because that's just the reality. But in college, it's a lot less like that, and I struggled a lot with like feeling very lonely because there was just less of that built-in networking. Um, but people don't have like you only see the people that you want to see is really the reality of college. And so that allows you to kind of go, you know, today I'm going to wear earrings. And it could be something as small as that, but like uh, people don't care. And the people that do care, you can very easily distance yourself from. So yeah, definitely do it if you feel comfortable.
Yeah, I just want to add on to that. Like, I know that sometimes people aren't as out in like high school or before college because it might not be safe with like family or friends. So, like, making sure you're able to like have a strong support system, like take care of your mental health, like keeping that in mind, especially because college is a big transition. So, like, being more out could also just put more of a stress on your health if you don't have supportive communities.
And I think at some colleges, like at least at my college, because I also went to like a predominantly women's college, um, it just queerness is assumed a lot of the time at my school. And at other schools, I know that it's um not people don't think like there's just like less compulsory heterosexuality going on in college, I feel, at least at like a really like kind of more liberal school. So then you can just kind of like just kind of be yourself, and it just becomes part of how everyone knows you because you're also creating a new identity. So it's like people will just know you as someone with a queer identity, and you don't really have to like come out, really, is kind of how it felt to me. In high school, it always felt like, oh, I need to come out to this group of people. And then in college, it's like, what up? Like, this doesn't feel like a coming out. I went on a date last week. Like, like things like that. And it's just a lot more, coming out feels more casual in college.
I agree with that. I feel like you can kind of be who you want to be in college. And it's not like you have to even be the same person that you were a day ago. Like I feel like college gives you the freedom. Of course, it depends on where you go. One thing that I think is important, and it really does depend again also on where you go to school, but like I went to Columbia, and like Columbia Barnard is literally on the Upper West Side of New York, and you can really like get anywhere, and you can, I feel like, make community anywhere. And I think if you're like a queer person, and if you're a queer person, you want to like be able to also branch outside of your college campus, going somewhere that is perhaps a city or has like a really nice college town is really important, because you can like take trips to, I don't know, like a queer museum, like Jamie and the Queer Jewish Identity Fellowship that I was on. We went to like a very like queer friendly synagogue in Manhattan. You can go to like queer museums. If you're of age, you can go to like a queer bar. And there are just so many different spaces where you can also be with other queer people and be with other queer Jews that is outside of the campus. So I think that's something that might be helpful to consider when choosing a school to go to, is like, where is it located? Is it safe for me as a queer person, as a queer Jewish person? And is there a life outside of the campus that I can also explore and make friends and make connections there as well?
And I just want to add to that sort of like the opposite end of the spectrum. I go to UNR, which is, well, Reno is less conservative than most of Nevada, but it's still pretty conservative, and it's not really near anything. It's like a 3 hour drive to Sacramento. That's the closest we got of like any big city. Um, I will say, like, even in a smaller town or a more conservative town, where there is a community of educators and colleges and things like that, there's always going to be people on the forefront like fighting to make community. Like I work at the local Hebrew school, and that rabbi like tweeted out, hey, anybody who, I think it was Louisiana was like making all these anti-trans legislations, um, tweeted out, hey, anybody who's coming to Reno for, you know, top surgery or bottom surgery or whatever, you have a couch here, DM me. And so like there's always going to be people, you just got to find those like those small communities.
Amazing. Those were really great answers. Our next question, another one from the audience, is any tips for dealing with potential homophobia in Jewish spaces and also potential anti Semitism in queer spaces?
So I think this is a good question to segue from the last one, because I think there's a lot of overlap in that. So, you know, I got a, as I said, Columbia Barnard, very queer, very Jewish space. Still deal with both of those things. I lived with someone who, lovely person, would say terrible things sometimes, like, you know, we already have a they. That was one thing. Or another person that I work with, for example, very publicly said that the Orthodox Dominion shouldn't celebrate queer couples. Things happen. I know these people. I don't have to be best friends with them because, as many people have said, degrees of separation, but sometimes you can't get through those degrees of separation. And, you know, part of it is just as you grow up, you might build a thicker skin to these things. I certainly have. And also part of it is you will have people to fall back on. You know, when the person I lived with would say silly things, we would, all the queer people I lived with, because there were a lot of us, we would get together and vent about it. And, you know, when the person I work with says something annoying, like I text my other board member and we're like, oh, that was so terrible. Like, and this isn't just queer people. I mean, you know, there are a lot of straight people who get it. And I think the same goes for the other side of things, right? Like, if you encounter anti-Semitism, had someone say like some it was like, I don't remember exactly the context, but it was some pretty offensive stuff. And, you know, I went home to my Jewish friends and I vented about it and I felt a lot better. So having those communities really helps. And even if you don't have, you know, those communities, I think, like, you know, you have the strength within you. And I think college is a great place to find that strength because you're out of your comfort zone and that pushes you, I think, to do good things.
So I haven't really experienced a lot of homophobia within the Jewish community here. A lot of our leaders, both in like adult leadership and student leadership, are queer. But I have experienced a lot of anti-Semitism within the like white goyish, um, you know, queer community. And I mean, like, I, as a freshman, I opted in for these like new dorms that they were doing for their first time, where it was like you had to like identify yourself as queer in order to like live in that dorm so that you could room with other queer people. And I was like, wow, this is great. And I ended up rooming in a suite full of trans people, and one of them was an active neo-Nazi. I don't know how those two things can go together, but somehow they made it happen. And when I was, you know, having a breakdown and going, I need to leave, the first thing that happened was I called my Hillel director, and you know, I was like crying, and I was like I don't know what to do, and she just was like, Matt, what do you need right now? Like, what what do you need? I was just like, I need to leave. She was like, meet me across the street at the pizza place in 10 minutes. And she let me stay on her couch for a weekend until I figured it out. There's, I guess, how do I put this? Like, there's a lot of people who, even if they, you know, might not completely understand you or might not be the kindest, like, you're Jewish, so other Jewish people want to help you. You're queer, so other queer people want to help you. This is a generalization, but um, if you need help, you will be able to find someone.
I also want to add that I have also experienced, I think, in college more anti-Semitism in queer spaces than homophobia in Jewish spaces, and that is part of the reason I wasn't super active in the queer community in my college. Also, I just like, I don't see the point in doing this right now, but also like, you know, people would get kind of like, I don't know, nasty when they'd find out I was in Hillel, just like petty with me. And so my advice would be just don't feel like you have to exist in all the spaces at once, like that you don't have to be active in all the spaces at once. You can find your people anywhere. Like my Hillel was like super, super queer. When I was president, the entire executive board, like the president, vice presidents, and the rabbi were all queer. And so that just became my queer space because I was like, I just don't want to deal with the anti-Semitism in the non-Jewish queer spaces. And like same thing in the Jewish spaces. I kind of think we had one student that would come that was homophobic, and we just kind of would collectively ignore him and his antics because we couldn't kick him out. So then a lot of it is just ignoring it. To be entirely honest, fighting it will only get you so far. At a certain point, just for the sake of your sanity, you kind of have to just back off and be like, okay, I'm not going to listen to him, or I'm just not going to go there much. Like,
Yeah, I also agree that I experienced more anti-Semitism than homophobia, like just in general. And I think just like to echo what everyone else said is there are, at least at my university, there were so many resources, and in our Hillel, people were the staff members and the entire Hillel kind of is just very, I feel like very queer friendly in my opinion. So I didn't feel like I needed to leave and go search for another community. I did, you know, search for queer community that wasn't Jewish, but it didn't fulfill me. And I can't remember who said it, but that was very true, that you don't have to like be in every single space that your identity, like that you hold in your identity. Like I have a bunch of different identities as many other people do, and sometimes also you just don't have the time. Like you have like schoolwork and you might have a job, like, and there's a lot of clubs and there's a lot of things to do, and you just may not have time to be in every single kind of club that's there. So you just have to decide like what is a priority to you. And to me it was more of a priority to be in Jewish spaces, and then great, and then, like luckily they were very queer. You just have to kind of like decide what is a priority to you, and you can still honor your other identities in different ways. I mean, I think that's the great thing about college is like you're kind of an adult, and so you can kind of just like live your life. And you know, maybe there are actually like tangible places where you can go to serve the community that you're prioritizing in the moment, but it doesn't mean that you're abandoning your other one. I mean, that I think that's like something that's really important to stress.
I really like what Tova just said about like you'll have your community, like you'll have like maybe a few safe like friends or whatever. Like unfortunately, like homophobia and anti-Semitism will exist in the whole world. I'm not saying that like buck up, but I'm like saying like if you have like your own safe smaller community, like that will support you, and like you should lean on that in those times of like distress.
Awesome. Our next question is, it seems like all of you have experience in larger Jewish communities, but do any of you have any advice for smaller Jewish communities?
So I am not in a large community at all. The Hillel of all of northern Nevada, from Reno to Elko, which is an insanely long drive away. We do not interact with these students very much. Um, all of them, it makes up about 200 people total. It is not a big community. The majority of the Hillel, like active participants, where you'll see them at every event, are pretty much the Jewish fraternity and the Jewish sorority. It's really small, very, very close knit, and I guess I'm not really sure what specific advice you're looking for, but I would say that a small community is just as meaningful and fulfilling, or has the ability to be so, as a larger community. You're going to have a lot less people, but when you have a smaller community, there's a lot of a sense of like really, really tight knit community, that like, oh, I just met you, but you're in this little small group with me, so I will die for you. And that's sort of the experience that I have had. And I can't say that that's going to be the experience everywhere, but don't knock a small community. Uh, we can get a lot of stuff done in a small community.
Thank you. Um, our next question is, thinking back to when you were searching for colleges while in high school, did you / how did you prioritize campus / Jewish diversity and opportunities to plug into both queer and Jewish community?
I didn't think about it at all. I wanted to go somewhere queer friendly, and I saw that they had a Hillel, and I was like, oh, okay, like I guess there's Jews here. But I didn't think about Jewish life at all because I was not involved in Jewish life at all, and I fell into it. But I think that kind of just like you don't have to plan it out, your college out around where you're going to find these spaces. You can find spaces like that at most schools, I would say. I'm all of my friends that I've tried to find queer Jewish spaces have found them. So it doesn't have to be what you like necessarily plan your college about. You might want to find somewhere that's not like super homophobic, and then you'll probably find queer Jews there.
Yeah, I didn't prioritize it at all. I was literally just thinking about where was affordable. I just couldn't. I applied to Brandeis. I got in. I couldn't afford it. So even though that would have been probably an environment that would have had more of that, it just didn't happen. And I would say I agree with what Rebecca said. My grandpa likes to say there's Jews everywhere. Maybe not that many, but if you're looking for them, you can find them. And as far as the queer community, um, again, I mean, you're going to college. It's just a different setting, and I would say that most colleges tend to have at least pockets of more accepting and liberal, like schools of thought.
So for me, this Jewish population was huge for me for a couple of reasons. First of all, is I knew I wanted to keep kosher or continue keeping kosher, because so that was like a pretty hard, like I need kosher dining services. I knew I needed a Hillel with services that would feel welcoming to me, which is harder than you might think because I'm not Orthodox. I'm also observant, like small niche. So like for me, it was one of the primary things I was thinking about when I chose my schools. And when I visited JTS and Barnard, I instantly fell in love with the Jewish community. So that was like that search was just a lot of Googling. But when it came to the queer community, I actually wasn't thinking so much about that. But when I came to Barnard, one of the things that really made a difference for me was it's the only school I went to where the tour guides introduced themselves with their pronouns. And I'd had queer tour guides, and it was the only school that did that. It's the only school that made the effort to say, in that small way, like, this is something we find important. And I know now, because I work for admissions, that it's not just like, it's part of you have to do it at every single admissions event. Because that was something they wanted to, they value that. And that's something that Barnard as a school values. And so, you can find these things in what a school says, what a school does. You can look into, groups and And you may not join those groups, but those groups can be indicative, I think. If you have a school that has queer studies curriculum and a Jewish studies curriculum, there are going to be queer people and Jews who are doing that curriculum academically. If you have a Hillel and a queer group on campus, like, they may be small, but they're going to have members. So those are some of the questions I'd ask. I think in particular also, and this is not my experience, but even if a university only has a Chabad, or the Chabad is more active than the Hillel, that can be something to consider. Like, is that the space? Chabad can be really good for queer people. It also could be not such a nice space. So that's like another thing that kind of, to think about. But ultimately, like, the more research, you do research and also talk to students. When I was applying, I was like, I'm very nervous about being a trans woman at a women's college. And there were not any trans women that they could put me in contact with. But they did put me in contact with someone, I don't know exactly how. They put me in some member of the trans community who went to Barnard. We had a long conversation and it was wonderful. And it really helped me feel good about my decision. So, yeah.
Yeah, I personally, I don't think I was necessarily thinking like, oh, the school I'm going to, whether like, does it have like a great Jewish community or a queer community? I was just trying to, I feel like just trying to go to like the best school that I could. And I felt like the schools that I was applying to a lot of like liberal arts schools. And I felt like just through searching through them, I found that they had a good amount of them had Jewish communities and queer communities, which was great. When I started college, I had the goal of like becoming more observant and more religious. And so just thankfully, like my school had a lot of resources for me to explore kind of like my faith more and explore like how I wanted to practice. But I think if it's something that's like really, really important to you that you want like very like safe spaces for you, then definitely like look into it, because you don't want to like show up to school and then find out that there's a problem, like there's a lot of anti-Semitism or there's homophobia. I mean, at least I know with my campus, there's a lot of anti-Semitism, and that's something that my school's even been in the news because of all the anti-Semitism. But I really wanted to go to my school, and also there's a great Jewish community, so that was something that was comforting. I mean, we have like hundreds of students who are involved in our Hillel, and then there's also the Chabad, and I was involved with the Chabad as well. And I think one thing I was also going to say is, if you have like a Jewish community wherever you are, like at home, perhaps like have like your rabbi, your rebbitzin, or someone contact the campus Chabad, or maybe the Hillel. Maybe there's some connections, because I think that will be able to help the transition. Like, for example, my like Chabad rebbitzin from where I'm from, she contacted the rebbitzin at my university's Chabad. So I showed up there and they were like, oh, we already know like your people, basically, like we know the people who you pray with at home. And that was really comforting, trying to make it feel as much like home as possible.
When I was looking at colleges, I was thinking a lot about where I could like develop my queer identity, and then I was thinking about my Jewish identity. I didn't think about the intersection that much, and I think it would have been good if I'd done that. So even though like the Hillel and another place at my university, like on their website, like mention like all these queer subgroups, I realized once I got to campus that they weren't actually very active, and they didn't meet regularly, and like a lot of the stuff that I might have been hoping to find wasn't as like active as I wanted it to be. So I would just like recommend, like, if you're at a college, if you're able to tour, if you're able to like talk to someone on campus, like ask them about like what kinds of events they have, if you're like really interested in like the intersection and like those kinds of things. And also, if it's not there, like if you're like gutsy, you could be the one to start it or revive it. So it's not a lost cause if you really like a school and they don't have the intersection there.
Yeah, and I would also I really like what Julia just said, and I also wanted to like emphasize what Tova said about like reaching out. I emailed my Hillel director the summer before I went to the college, and um, I didn't realize like the level of like preparation and forethought that she had put into how to make sure that I was comfortable and safe and welcome. I found out like a year after that she had told the Chabad representative, about me and go like, hey, this he is a trans man, do keep Shomer Nagia and don't touch him, or do touch him, whatever you feel like, but don't freak out on him. And even just that much, I didn't realize that I had to think about that, and that definitely would have alienated me. And so I would say like reaching out allows them to do their part.
I'd like to answer this one. I think I did think about it a lot in terms of my trans identity and whether I would be safe as a trans person at this school and whether they would have housing options for me. And then also, like, as a observant Jewish person, I was also looking for that, and that has a like very small intersection, as Alex was saying. I happened to go to the same school as Alex, um, which works out because that niche of the religious but liberal community really works out. Um, so I'm gonna go to the next question. Um, how has your Jewish identity changed since you started college? How have your needs as an LGBTQ plus person changed since you started college?
It's been a journey. It's been a lot. Yeah, so I came to college not being connected to my Judaism at all, going to synagogue with my family when they made me, generally just on like Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And my only other Jewish experience is from my Orthodox family, which did not help me feel more connected to my Judaism, if I'm going to be entirely honest. Um, so then I got to college and I just kind of fell into Hillel. Like I just went to the high holidays because I was homesick, and then I met cool people and I just stayed there. And for around a year or two, that really like upped my Judaism. Like I started like being a lot more observant. And then I went through some personal things and like, had a crisis of faith, and I'm now an atheist who still identifies as Jewish. So I'm kind of back where I started off, but just more connected to the community, like to a Jewish community, but not any more connected to like the faith-based religious parts. And then I think my needs as a queer person have just become less prevalent because I've been out as queer for longer, and it's just like a more casual part of who I am than it was in high school when I was just like sorting through it. So I'm just like, I don't feel like I have particular needs as a queer person except for people just not being jerks. Uh, and that's around it. The Judaism part was much more like up and down and complicated.
Yeah, I also have had quite a journey. I am not even remotely the same person I was when I started college, and I think that's the case for most people. It's a very like transformative time. Um, when I first started college, I really wasn't involved in the Jewish community. I had gone to Hebrew school, and I'd even volunteered after I finished at with my B'nai Mitzvah, but uh, I kind of fell off the wagon a little bit, and my dad's not. He's the kind of Jewish where he won't eat bread on Passover, so he'll make himself a ham sandwich on matzah. Which is a really still trying to figure that one out. But I ended up, the first week of college, one of my old friends from Hebrew school messaged me and was like, "Hey, you go to Reno?" And I was like, "Yeah, long time no talk." Okay. And he was like, "Oh, I'm in this Jewish fraternity. You should come check it out. There'll be free food." And I was really, ambivalent, like, "Ooh, I'm not sure that a fraternity is where I will feel the most comfortable as a trans guy." But honestly, they're the most affirming guy friends I've ever had in my life, and they're very supportive. And so I would say, like, just from that and becoming sort of immersed in the community, I've just become way more Jewish in like every sense of the word. I started wearing a kippah because that was like a pledge challenge that my fraternity big gave me, and I just liked it so much I kept doing it. Um, as far as queer needs, uh, honestly, I started testosterone right before going to college, and being able to medically transition, even just in hormones, has really helped with my dysphoria, and I've become a lot more confident as a person, which means that my needs to sort of regulate who I'm around and for how long and stuff like that has really gone down, and I'm able to just kind of be myself.
I think for me, with when it comes to queerness, I think one of the big shifts from high school to college was that my primary queer community went from a group of people I met a few times a year at Keshe Shabbatonium to like a group of people that I saw almost every day if I wanted to. And that made a huge difference, right? Like when you have a queer community that is like actual people that you can see and interact with, I think the dynamics are very different. And it made me, I think, right, like it made me view and understand queerness quite differently. I think that that is something that I've gone through a huge shift on. It's understanding like what matters and understanding how, like how we interact with each other as a community and how much that really matters. Um, in terms of Jewishness, I think college has been very much confirming what I already like. It's confirming the identities I already held, strengthening them, deepening them. I was pretty set on what my Judaism looked like before I went to college, and it doesn't look all that different, which I think is a good thing because I found my people pretty quickly. But I think and this is kind of a unified point for both of them. It's really having people who are older than me, who are queer, who are Jewish, who are queer and Jewish, who can kind of model and be in community with me in a very different way than, in that, they're not my parents' age. They're 10 years older than me, 5 years older than me. And I think that that creates a huge difference in how we interact. And, for the first time, having a rabbi that I could really talk to and relate with, and having, well, rabbinic intern, but she's a rabbi now. Having a community that I can step up and lead and bring my queerness into in the Jewish community, it makes a huge difference to not necessarily how I view myself, but how I relate with others and how I understand my place in the Jewish community and the queer community. And I think one thing I think has been really, really powerful for me is just deepening. I mean, getting to learn about Judaism, not just as in the classroom or from Hebrew school or from anything like that, but as a lived experience, and getting to see how, my friends who are Jewish who don't care about Judaism and are just whatever, and my friends who their whole life is Judaism, I fall more into the latter category. It's just a wonderful constellation of people to have around me, and I really enjoy it. It's a great place.
I think for me, in terms of like my queer needs, I feel as if a lot of my friends were queer, and so we got to like celebrate our queerness like around each other, and that was definitely very important for me to have. But I think in high school I was just high school was, as a queer person, was really hard for me, and it was like a really difficult time. And then once I got to college, I felt that it just wasn't as hard for me. I just felt like I just could just be, and everything about like being queer doesn't have to be like the first thing that everyone knows about me, which I mean, I love being queer, and I love to share that. But I just kind of felt as if um, queerness kind of became just more part of like my essence than necessarily like when I was like wearing like rainbow stuff every day in high school and stuff like that. And then like if you still do that, that's totally great. But I felt like I just kind of um, my queerness just changed in the way that I present it to other people and the way that I speak about it. And then in terms of my Jewishness, I I started college knowing that I wanted to become more observant. I didn't really know what that looked like because my home life was not observant at all, and it was a pretty slow journey. Like I became part of the Reform community, but I was also part of the Chabad because that's what I knew from because my family was part of the Chabad, even though we weren't observant. So people would kind of laugh like, okay, you were part of the Reform community and Chabad. It was like two completely different communities, but for me, it made a lot of sense. And I still had my own ways of practicing. And then near the end of college is when I found myself like gravitating more towards the Orthodox community. And that's kind of like where I am now, like traditional Orthodox. And I just think that Judaism, like Alex said, is something that has become part of just everything I do. Like I think I definitely like annoy probably like everybody with just like everything I talk about, everything I listen to, everything I say it comes back to Judaism, and because it feels like my rock. It feels like it's what supports me, and it's what carries me. So I think that I'm very grateful for college for letting me just kind of be where I am in that moment and not have to necessarily perform who I am like for a certain person, like be like less Jewish or anything like that. Like let me just be me and let me just see where it'll take me. And I feel kind of I'm honestly like having just graduated, I'm like proud of myself. Like I'm proud of myself and how far I've come from being like a queer person in high school who was just like struggling with, and also a Jewish person in high school who was also just trying to figure out my Jewish identity. I can say like I got out of college being like, you know what, like I made myself proud. I took care of both aspects of that identity, of those identities.
Thank you. Just wanted to do a time check. Rabbi Dina, how much time do we have? We have two more questions.
We have about 15 minutes left, and this is amazing. So
Awesome.
keep going.
Thank you. All right. So this one, I accidentally just muted myself. This one is for Matt. Matt, I'm really interested in your experience at AEPI and in serving in a leadership role there. Frats and sororities are often stereotyped as not super accepting of various gender identities. Hold on, there's more to the question. What has that experience been like for you? What advice would you give to a student who wants Greek life to be part of their campus experience?
Great question. I think the issue of queerness in Greek life. I mean, Greek life is very cishet normative. It's let's separate into binary gender categories and perform binary gender roles together, or at least that's kind of what it usually looks like. And I'm not saying that every AEPI chapter or that every fill in the blank fraternity is going to be the most accepting. It really depends on the people, and if you are interested in the Greek life at your college, I would say reach out to them. Most fraternities and sororities have like an Instagram account, Facebook account, fill in the blank account, and you can reach out to them and go, hey, I'm queer. If you're comfortable telling them that, I'm queer. Um, I'm interested in Greek life, but I want to make sure that the people that are around me are going to be 100% supporting and uplifting. And for me, the fraternity brother that had reached out to me, the old friend from Hebrew school, was also queer, so that helped a little bit. And my big was also queer, so that helped. But there were definitely brothers that were not the most aware of trans identity or of queer identity at all. And um, the thing that I think really made my experience positive was that there was enough members that wanted to enforce the sort of, hey, we should listen to him. He knows what he's talking about. He is queer. And so it got to the point where, there'd be a lot of the brothers who were like, a little dumb, a little unaware of anything outside of like really hyper masculine settings, and then go, hey, is this offensive? And show me like a meme that they found. And I'd be like, yes, it is. And they'd be like, why? I'd be like, well, because you're assuming that trans men aren't really men or whatever, fill in the blank. And they took it to heart and they listened. And that's not something that you can, just apply like a barometer to. But, just check it out. And if you like the vibe, then go with it.
Thank you so much. All right. We have 3 questions that are basically the same question. So if someone entered the waiting room, admit they're very late, but okay. What colleges are known to be the most supportive to queer people with the biggest Jewish communities? And then which colleges are known to be the most supportive to queer people with the biggest Jewish communities? And what colleges are the most supportive to queer Jews?
I can just say off the top of my head, obviously I'm gonna plug Columbia Barnard, wonderful place to be queer and Jewish. I know that Brandeis has a lot of Jews, obviously, and a lot of queer Jews. Trying to think of other schools that I know people at. Brown has a little bit of a queer Jewish community. I know that this is not like, I'm not making anything authoritative. This is all like word of mouth and people I know and friends I have who enjoyed their college experience as queer Jews, like Yale, I think, as well. Trying to think where else I know people who that have, other people can chime in. I think that's the extent of my list for now.
I would recommend, oh, sorry, Matt. I would recommend, like, I don't want to like name names because I think it's so like you're gonna find community based on like if you feel comfortable there, like if you're able, if you have the time and energy to like actually reach out and like have conversations and visit places, like if that's within your like time and budget, definitely recommend doing that because you'll be able to feel that more than like any numbers will tell you. But I mean, like lists out there like that like tell you like queer friendly and Jewish, like large Jewish population colleges, like those are legit and those are trustworthy. And I'd also just say that like being closer to a large city is, you're probably going to be able to find more community. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, I definitely agree with, what Julia just said. And I also want to say, like I go to UNR, we're not really close to any big cities. And we don't really we're not going to be on any lists that you might find looking up, best places to be queer at college or best places to be Jewish at college. But, we have a very active Hillel, and Keshet and, queer Jewish events is a very large part of our budget, and it's a big focus that we have. So I would say just, if you're interested in college, poke around and see.
Just reading out the chat for the people who will be watching on YouTube later. Cornell, Penn, Yale, NYU, University of Maryland, the Claremont colleges, and U Chicago. And then So I have a question, but I don't want it to end on a sad note. So if anyone from the audience has any last minute questions, feel free to type them in the chat, or I will post the link to the Mentimeter again. For now, I will ask my question, and then hopefully we'll get another one so we can end on a high note. So we did touch on this a little bit, but I wanted to ask it explicitly. Have you ever compromised your Jewish identity to be accepted in queer spaces, and or compromised your queer identity to be accepted in Jewish spaces?
Okay, so yes, quite a bit. In particular, this is kind of a me problem, but I would constantly be compromising my queer identity in Jewish spaces whenever I'd be around Chabad, because my aunt called up the Chabad rabbi where I was going to school and was like, keep an eye on my niece, and I didn't want them reporting back that I was queer. So that I would compromise my queer identity a lot in those spaces. And then my Jewish identity, I sometimes just wouldn't bring it up. I wouldn't really say I would compromise it because I wasn't that active in the queer community. Like I'd go to queer parties, and I just wouldn't really mention it to everyone I talked to. But I'd also go with my Jewish friends, so then we talk about it together. So it wasn't really feeling like compromising it, just not the first thing people learned about me in queer spaces.
Definitely, I have compromised in both ways. Personally, more compromising my Jewish identity in queer spaces. Reno's just very white guyish, and it's just harder to be Jewish here. But I'm very hard headed, and I don't really like to compromise. So usually my response to this would be like, my guyish queer friends don't really know anything about Judaism. Let me talk their ear off about it. Let me bring them to the AE Pi parties. You know? And it got to the point where, like, at the AE Pi parties, we wouldn't have enough guys because it would just be all the girls and the gays.
Specifically at college has not. There have certainly been times where that might have been a good thing to do, but it was not what I did because I don't do that. I'm a very stubborn person. Like, look, when I interact with people who, there's a lot of Orthodox people at my school, and a lot of them are really, really wonderful and welcoming and affirming, and some of them are not. And I don't pretend and hide myself around the people that I'm not, that are not. So, you know, and I don't hide my Jewishness. I don't, you know, and I'm very honest about it when I meet people, and people just have to deal with that. And sometimes I've had people say unfortunate and not so nice things. And sometimes I've had people who don't say those things to my face, but then I know they've said those things in other contexts. And I just kind of deal with it because I don't have the time to worry about it, I guess. I don't know.
I'm still imagining an AE Pi party in Nevada full of all the girls and gays, and I'm just like so happy like with that visual. So like I'm so happy for you, Matt. And I've definitely had to compromise my identities before, but I don't know. I feel like the story Matt told is like a more beautiful version of anything I could say. Like, even though you might have to compromise them, like you will hopefully like be able to find your smaller community, and they'll be able to find like that safe place and like be able to, you know, spend your time with people who don't make you compromise that.
Yeah, I feel like I compromise my identity in both spaces. I think that I compromised, or maybe I wasn't compromising my Jewish identity, but I was more aware in not just like queer spaces, but more so, I'm gonna be very honest, in like progressive spaces on my campus about my queerness, like because my campus tends to sometimes like the progressive spaces can be very anti-Semitic. And that's like a really difficult thing because you're like, oh, I want to like talk to y'all and be part of your groups, but you have some kind of nasty things to say about me being a Jew, and anything else that comes with that identity. So I'm gonna be honest, like I stayed away from those spaces that weren't going to be accepting of my Jewish identity. And I tried, and I definitely would, I would go to some of the events, and and I always wore my Star of David around. And I think, people who knew me or knew of me knew that I was a very proud Jew on campus. But you just, at some point, you may have to just say, like, I can't compromise today, and I'm not going to compromise. And it means that there's maybe a space that I wanted to go to that I'm just not going to, because I don't want to have to I don't want to have to belittle myself to make somebody else feel comfortable. And then I agree with the idea that you may just have to create your own space, and I was lucky enough to be around several Jews of color, and that became somewhat of a community of being with people who were people of color and who were also Jewish and who could understand my experiences. And I didn't have to explain myself to them. And, I think that like, that's a very, people don't think like you can actually create your own space. And I think you should take, the resources that you have and make something that perhaps isn't there already.
Thank you so much. Those were fantastic answers. And now our last and final question. What is your favorite part about being queer and Jewish? I know it's a toughie.
I'm gonna say I love that being both queer and Jewish means that I'm hilarious and I can make jokes about everything.
Honestly, I'm just gonna say I really love the community that I found. And I really like that I found people that I have like similarities with uh and being able to like form communities based off of identity, but not just solely that, just as having that as like something to initially like bond over.
I think, yeah, just jumping off what Rebecca said, because I had a very similar experience. I naturally gravitated and kind of found the community of queer Jews, and that was a very natural home for me very quickly. I know one of the things that can be really difficult about transitioning to college is finding that community, not just in terms of identity, but just finding friends, because it's it's a very different like the networking and friendship making happens very differently. But for me, I actually didn't have a hard time because I just like, you're queer and Jewish, I'm queer and Jewish, let's talk about this. Like, a friend of mine invited me for like lunch or dinner. It was dinner, the first week of school, because she was like trying to, help, like, queer and Jewish, let's talk. Still my best friend. So, that was a really wonderful thing to kind of start with. And I have another friend, like, we made friends, and she was like, have you considered doing this major that I'm doing? And I was like, no, but now I'm a comparative literature major. And I didn't know what that was when I came to college, but I found out about it because of Queer Juice. So
My answer is quick. I just love being queer and Jewish because that's all of me. So I want to like have both identities be present.
Same here.
Yeah, I mean, I love everything about being queer and Jewish. It's really who I am. And that concludes our panel for tonight. Thank you for those who are here. Thank you so much to our amazing panelists. I feel like I really got a crash course on queer and Jewish identities in college, and like I've already gone through a year of it. So thank you. And now back to Dina for some closing remarks. Yes.
Yes. Thank you so much. I also just want to close by offering a little bit of gratitude. Thank you, Sawyer, to you for forming this panel and really making this evening happen. I also learned a lot, and I am however many years out of school. So really, really just appreciated this. To Ami and Jamie and the amazing staff of Keshet, thank you for all the work that you do and for enabling us at the Funder Collaborative to highlight this topic and really feature this on the road trip. It was very, very important that we be able to do that this year. So very, very grateful. And to this amazing panel, incredibly grateful to all of you for your candor, for really sharing a lot about your own college experience, from search to enrollment to, for some of you, graduation, and mazel tov on that. And for your advice and this really helpful and hopeful narrative that you shared, that I think is just incredibly meaningful to those in our community who are really just beginning to imagine themselves on campus. And I think, Rebecca, you said it best when you said it's been a journey. And I think that's a great way to end. We hope that everyone who is beginning their college process or thinking about their next steps academically and otherwise, that you take Rebecca's advice and really embrace that journey. You got to hear the varying journeys of several different people this evening, and I hope that much of it resonated with you, and that you are excited and eagerly anticipating your own journey in every aspect of your growing and deepening identity, from high school to college and well beyond. So thank you, everyone. If you want to follow up with any of our panelists or with Keshet, we'll make sure that all of that information is included in the description of this video on YouTube and in the follow-up materials that we send. And please know that these resources and these people are out there for you to connect with should you have further questions or want to connect. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful evening, and we'll see you at our next and final stop on the road trip next week. On Monday night, we will be learning with Repair the World about how we can use our college experience to really raise our voice on justice issues that are important to us. So we'll see you there.
Thank you. Have a good evening.